He was still lying in a pool of blood, watching helplessly as his wife was killed by German soldiers consumed by brutality. The very next second, he was knocking on the door of a German widow. And the only reason was to deliver the news that her husband had died in battle. Was it revenge, or was it redemption?
Ich suche Różę Kwiatkowską. Ich war dabei, als ihr Mann starb.
The answer, however, went far beyond anyone's imagination, because for this woman, the news of her husband's death did not bring closure, but marked the beginning of another nightmare. Peace had arrived, but her war was far from over. The female lead is named Rosa, and legally, she was once the wife of a German man, but now, she has become a foreigner living on her own homeland, because on this former German land ceded to Poland, Rosa's identity became painfully awkward. As a German widow, she naturally turned into one of the most unwelcome remnants on this newly claimed Polish territory. Her identity had to be redefined, reviewed, and judged. The story begins in the blood-soaked ruins of the Warsaw Uprising, the largest urban resistance movement of World War II, which ultimately ended in tragic defeat under the joint stranglehold of Germany and the Soviet Union. The Polish veteran Tadeusz is a survivor, a man who witnessed his wife's brutal death yet was powerless to stop it. The label of a failed husband became a shadow that followed him for the rest of his life. Several months later, the war ended, and Tadeusz left Warsaw, traveling alone to the remote Masurian Lake District. There, he sought someone who, like himself, had lost the person they loved most to the war. However, his identity as a member of the Polish Home Army made him a primary target for post-war state security investigations. Along the way, he could only move forward while hiding. One day, exhausted to the bone, he discovered a destroyed military vehicle sunk in a muddy swamp and stepped closer to search it. Inside, there was only a sniper rifle and a stack of US dollars nearly ruined by water, and without hesitation, he threw the rifle back into the mud. Because he had sworn to forget that bloody past, he carefully tucked the money into his coat instead. Perhaps this cash was the only thing that could support him on the path toward a peaceful future. After many twists and turns, Tadeusz obtained Rosa's address from a kind-hearted priest. Yet when the door opened and he faced this unfamiliar woman, he suddenly found himself unable to speak. After a moment of silence, Tadeusz slowly handed over her husband's belongings, while Rosa remained silent the entire time, simply accepting the small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside were a photo of her and her husband together, and a wedding ring. At that moment, Rosa instantly understood her fate. She put away this heavy gift and turned to sit down, but her hands trembled uncontrollably.
Jak zginął?
Faced with her cold questions, Tadeusz found himself unable to answer. What no one expected was that these two souls shattered by war would begin their true connection from this very moment. That evening, Rosa invited Tadeusz to stay for dinner and told him that if he wished, he could stay the night and leave the next day. Tadeusz did not refuse, because compared to the outside world, the farmhouse was much safer. But in truth, he did not sleep at all that night. Early the next morning, after helping Rosa carry 2 buckets of water, Tadeusz prepared to leave, but unexpectedly, Rosa made a request that sounded dangerously risky.
Daleko do miasta?
Zależy którędy. Może mógłbyś mi pomóc? Mam kartofle na polu, ale tam są miny.
Ale ja nie jestem saperem.
Myślałam, że każdy żołnierz się zna.
It was clear that Tadeusz was lying at that moment, and the truth that followed would later prove it. After a hurried farewell, Tadeusz arrived at a nearby town, where he was drawn toward a loud and chaotic crowd.
Nie ma na co czekać. Trzeba napisać podanie. Po polsku. Potem będzie rozmowa, też po polsku. Tym, którzy otrzymają zaświadczenie, że należą do narodu polskiego, będziemy pomagać jak własnym obywatelom. Inni, to znaczy Niemcy, otrzymają termin wysiedlenia. Czy to jest zrozumiałe?
To cię na maso, nie świeszteje?
He saw German villagers who had voiced even mild criticism of the Soviet army being beaten and humiliated by the police of the new Polish government, and he turned away. Yet the image of Rosa surfaced in his mind. A sense of fate washed over him, and if nothing unexpected happened, the German woman he had just left behind would likely not escape the disaster brought by that identity declaration. Afterward, he quickly got a haircut, as if clearing away his tangled thoughts, then wandered around the town again, hoping to find a job so he could hide away once more. But nothing came of it. In the end, he set off on the road back to Rosa's farmhouse. An indescribable bond made him feel that he should do something more for this woman whose life was marked by misfortune. With his beard shaved, Tadeusz looked far more handsome, and there was new light in his eyes. Yet this still failed to change Rosa's attitude toward him.
Dobrze, rozminuję i pójdę.
Nie mam czym zapłacić, tylko tymi kartoflami.
Mogą być kartofle.
Tu.
Using the bayonet he carried with him, Tadeusz fashioned a crude mine-detecting tool. After saying a brief prayer, he cautiously stepped into the mine-laden field. Though the tool was simple, Tadeusz carefully examined every inch of the land. Soon, he made discoveries and unearthed several landmines one by one, but just as he was fully focused, the sound of a motorcycle came from Rosa's farmhouse, and as expected, something terrible happened. Although Tadeusz drove away the violent Russian soldiers, Rosa could not break free from her overwhelming fear. After a long silence, Rosa told Tadeusz a cold and cruel truth. On this land, aside from the Germans, every other force regarded them as worthless, and her life had long been trapped by such despair. A few days later, all the landmines in the field had been marked by Tadeusz, and at the same time, he harvested many potatoes that should have rotted in the ground. As he strained to hoist a full sack of potatoes onto his shoulder, his overburdened pants split open, and this sudden embarrassment unexpectedly earned a brief smile from Rosa. In that moment, the air suddenly carried the scent of real life. Later, when Tadeusz intended to deliver potatoes to Rosa's neighbors, he was once again stung by the cold indifference of this land.
Dzień dobry. Przyniosłem ziemniaki od Róży Kwiatkowskiej.
Keine Geschenke von dieser Schlampe.
Ustatkuj się.
Chore.
Co ty robisz?
Russisch es. Fritzchen.
Źle zrozumiała.
Seeing Tadeusz's confused expression, the priest finally told him the truth about Rosa.
Sie war im volkstümlichen Leseraum aktiv. Sie sprach Polnisch und wurde als pro-polnisch angesehen. Im Januar begann eine große, erschreckende Flucht der Masuren und dann Rückkehr in Chaos und ohne eine Hoffnung, dass es einen Ort gibt, an den man zurückkehren könnte. Nur Rosa ist zurückgekommen.
The priest went on to say that ever since Soviet soldiers moved into Rosa's farm, her fate had been completely changed. In the eyes of the neighbors, she had become what they called a Russian prostitute. One day, Rosa was busy inside with her needlework, mending the torn pants for Tadeusz. Suddenly, a loud explosion came from outside the window, from the very field where Tadeusz had been clearing mines. Without a doubt, this was the moment when Rosa truly fell in love, because her life had long been filled with loss, and she had never dared to hope for anything.
Bist du verrückt oder was? Wir brauchen kein Feld mehr. Weißt du, es ist genug, es reicht. Oh mein Gott, ich hatte Angst, dass uns kaum essen.
Yet the man before her gave her something to lean on, even if only for a moment. Tadeusz realized this as well and revealed a shy smile. In the days that followed, Rosa began working the fields alongside Tadeusz and never again let him clear mines alone. Tadeusz also went to the town from time to time, using the dollars he had pulled from the swamp to buy daily necessities for Rosa. One day, when Tadeusz returned from town and stepped inside, he found Rosa trembling and curled up in a corner. It turned out that more Poles had come, beating and threatening her, and forcing her to leave what they claimed was Polish land, or else they would hang her. After calming the terrified Rosa, Tadeusz thought it over repeatedly and finally made a decision that would change himself.
Jak się czujesz?
Dobrze.
Muszę pojechać w jedno miejsce. Ale wrócę szybko.
He returned to the swamp, retrieved the sniper rifle he had once thrown away, and buried the landmines he had dug up around Rosa's farmhouse. To protect Rosa, Tadeusz, with a resolute determination, picked up the very profession he most wanted to forget. However, just as he was about to teach Rosa how to fire the gun, her body suddenly failed her, and after enduring long-term abuse, she began bleeding and suffered a miscarriage.
Potrzebuję lekarza. Moja żona umiera, jestem Polakiem, pomóżcie, no.
Fortunately, with the emergency treatment provided by one of Tadeusz's old friends, Rosa managed to survive, but her body, already on the verge of collapse, required careful and constant care in order to recover.
Straciła dużo krwi, musi leżeć. Trzeba ją obmywać, a w tym stanie sama nie da rady. Ktoś musi pomóc.
Just as Tadeusz found himself overwhelmed, Rosa revealed a secret to him. She had a daughter named Jadwiga. To protect her, she had no choice but to keep her daughter hidden in the attic all day, while telling the outside world that the child was already dead.
Matka cię prosi.
Yet whenever the Russians were mentioned, the horrific memories made her entire body tremble. Through sobs, Rosa spoke of the most cruel moment she had endured. In the days that followed, Jadwiga no longer had to hide in the attic all the time, because under Tadeusz's protection, the mother and daughter finally regained a sense of long-lost safety. One day, their neighbor Vasil came to visit. His family had been deported back here from Lithuania not long ago, so they held no hostility toward Rosa. Even so, they lived in constant fear as well. This visit brought eggs, bread, and alcohol, yet they had to bring their cow with them to prevent it from being stolen. At the dinner table, the two families chatted happily, and Vasil's family openly admired the love between Rosa and Tadeusz. However, Vasil had another purpose for this visit. He hoped that Tadeusz could also help them clear the landmines from their field. From that point on, Vasil's family became the only neighbors Rosa could truly grow close to. As time passed, the bond between Rosa and Tadeusz deepened. They moved from talking about life and death to quietly imagining a future together. This long-lost sense of ease filled their days with the warmth of everyday life. The lives of Rosa and her daughter Jadwiga finally seemed to return to the path they were meant to follow. However, the good times did not last.
Daleko tu. Pismo dla Róży Kwiatkowskiej. Pani?
Tak,
Dla nich będziesz Niemką, zabiorą ziemię i was wysiedlą.
to wysiedlą.
Tak, ale ja właśnie dla niej to robię, nie rozumiesz? Ty byś podpisał?
Obejmij tę ziemię, ja ci ufam.
Rosa appeared to have accepted the reality of being deported, but Tadeusz still wanted to make one last attempt. He went to the town official responsible for approving identity declarations, trying to secure an exception to the rejection order through bribery. In the end, nothing changed. Just as Tadeusz was about to leave, he was suddenly stopped by someone who claimed to be an old acquaintance now working for state security.
Pamiętasz mnie? Jesień 1943. Pod Połańcem. No, spotkanie Gwardii Ludowej z wami, jakowcami.
Tak, pamiętam, byłeś w obstawie sztabu.
No.
Co tu robisz, stąd jesteś?
Umacniam władzę rodową w Urzędzie Bezpieczeństwa. Szukam ludzi młodych, zdolnych, prawdziwych patriotów.
Ja skończyłem z wojaczką.
Masz kobietę. Niemkę.
Nie, Mazurka, mówi po polsku.
Nie wiesz w te bzdury, wszyscy tu Niemcy.
The encounter ended badly. Worse still, Tadeusz's identity as a member of the Polish Home Army was exposed as a result. That night, Tadeusz held Rosa in his arms but could not sleep, his mind replaying the encounter with state security earlier that day. At that moment, he vaguely sensed the danger closing in. Just then, barking erupted outside, and the alert Tadeusz peered through the crack of the window. Sure enough, in the darkness, several armed bandits were approaching the farmhouse. Tadeusz prepared himself, counting silently, gripping the detonator tightly. And after a brief wait, the outside suddenly fell silent. When Tadeusz went out to investigate, he found that the explosion had killed one of the attackers, along with a three-legged stray dog. By then, the neighbor Vasil rushed over after hearing the noise, and together they hastily buried the bodies. But fear was already written across Vasil's face, as he worried that Tadeusz's excessive protection of Rosa would provoke retaliation from the Poles and eventually bring disaster upon his own family. Despite all his caution, Vasil's family still failed to escape the bandits. A few days later, they were attacked, and everything they had was burned to the ground. In the end, Rosa took in Vasil's homeless family. Yet the peaceful days of Rosa and Tadeusz did not last long either. Rosa's body once again showed troubling symptoms, and the pain became unbearable. With no other choice, Tadeusz had to seek help once more from his old friend.
Pół roku temu.
Проверим железки. Другую руку. Теперь послушаем легкие. Имеются явные уплотнения. Не исключено, что карцинома. Где ты? Нет, не могу.
After seeing his friend off, Tadeusz stood frozen in place, tears streaming down his face. He lay flat on his back, cold rain mixing with his tears, as an overwhelming sense of helplessness swallowed him whole. A few days later, Tadeusz learned that his own identity documents had also been seized by state security, an unmistakable sign that they were preparing to act against him. Soon after, his old friend, fully aware of the danger, urged him to flee as soon as possible. In his view, Rosa did not have much time left. Jadwiga was destined to be deported to Germany, and Tadeusz should start planning for himself. However, Tadeusz did not take his friend's advice. When he returned to the farmhouse, he ran straight into state security officers interrogating the gravely ill Rosa. Enraged, Tadeusz shouted at them in defiance. As time passed, Rosa's condition worsened further, and state security showed no intention of letting Tadeusz go. With no other choice, Tadeusz entrusted Rosa to the kind-hearted priest, deeply aware that he could be arrested at any moment. Yet during Tadeusz's brief absence, disaster struck the farmhouse once again. Bandits attacked, and Vasil's entire family was not spared. The attackers even assaulted Rosa in front of Jadwiga, and pushed beyond endurance. Rosa fought back with all her strength and stabbed one of them. Facing the bandits who had taken Rosa hostage, the fearless Jadwiga pulled the trigger in rage. This shock completely shattered Rosa's spirit, and even medication could no longer save her. What was even more chilling was that Vasil, at this moment, turned his resentment toward them. He blamed all his misfortune on Rosa and Tadeusz for attracting violent bandits. Already filled with bitterness, Tadeusz naturally fought back with anger of his own.
Kurwa, żeby nie twoje awantury tobie nie zgwałcili.
Moją żonę zgwałcono i zabito prawie równocześnie. Mam się cieszyć, że nie żyje? Róża tyle razy gwałcona, że teraz umiera. Masz do nich pretensje? To jest dopiero wstyd i hańba.
The next day, Vasil's family moved out of Rosa's farmhouse. Winter in Missouri was especially cold, and in the midst of hardship, Rosa and her daughter clung to Tadeusz like people huddling together against a snowstorm. But Rosa's body was like a lamp running out of oil, its flame on the verge of going out. Lying on her sickbed, Rosa seemed to have endless words to say that day. Jadwiga listened carefully to every sentence, tears filling her eyes. That night, Rosa never fell asleep, forcing her eyes open as she gazed at Tadeusz beside her, listening word by word as he read aloud. Whenever he reached an emotional passage, Tadeusz would gently stroke her cheek. The woman on the sickbed could never have imagined that the man who once brought news of her husband's death would become the guardian of her entire life. After an unknown length of time, Rosa finally fell asleep, though her eyes remained open, as if she still had too much to let go. Sobbing, Tadeusz closed her eyes and struggled to continue reading the story she had not finished hearing. On that cold winter night, the two held tightly to each other. These two souls born from the ruins of war only wanted warmth and survival. Yet such a humble love was not tolerated by that mad era. Rosa's funeral was held at her farmhouse, with the priest leading the prayers and offering comfort. The ceremony was simple, attended by only a few neighbors. After it ended, Tadeusz silently opened all the windows, fulfilling Rosa's final wish. A soul long imprisoned was finally free to fly back to its homeland. The cold wind rushed in, dispersing the heaviness of death and carrying away a lifetime of suffering. On behalf of her mother Rosa, Jadwiga completed a wedding ceremony with Tadeusz, finally fulfilling the lifelong wish they both shared. However, when Tadeusz stepped out of the church, he was met not with blessings, but with a state security task force, and in that instant, he understood everything.
Pamiętaj, co mówiła mama. Pastor ci pomoże. Nie czekaj na mnie. Ułóż sobie życie i bądź szczęśliwy.
In the end, Tadeusz was arrested by state security for his identity as a member of the Polish Home Army. For refusing to confess, he was subjected to severe interrogation and ultimately imprisoned on charges of illegally possessing weapons and US dollars, and inciting the formation of armed groups. In essence, he was a victim of post-war political purges in Poland. It was not until 1956, when Cold War tensions temporarily eased, that Tadeusz was released as a political prisoner.
Co to za pociąg?
Niemcy wracają do Reichu. Zostawili swoje gospodarstwa.
After his release, his first destination was still the Masurian Lake District. Though 10 years had passed, this land continued to repeat the same cruel question. Identity certification. The platform was crowded with people waiting to be deported to Germany. Tadeusz stopped in the crowd, his gaze falling on the priest who was about to board the train.
Sie ist nicht hier. Sie wartet auf dich.
Returning to Rosa's farmhouse, the scenery remained the same, but everything else had changed. No one knew how Vasil, who once left in anger, had become the new owner of this place. All these entanglements, however, eventually came to an end. Holding Jadwiga's hand, Tadeusz walked farther and farther away, until they disappeared into the endless wilderness. Their figures merged with the land, and with the dust of history,